Hi, today you find me in Rome at Fumicino airport in the Emirates lounge there, waiting for a flight to take me to Dubai initially, and then I'm heading back to Auckland via Brisbane. So I thought I'd continue my look at the wines available while you're travelling with Emirates. I was in Auckland earlier this week. I was able to taste a pair of vintage ports from Taylor's. So following up on that, I thought I'd look and see if there was a port available to try here. And their offering today is the Taylor's late bottled vintage from the 2019 vintage. So I thought this would be a good opportunity to look at that in the light of having tried the other wines recently. Now, Taylor's actually were the pioneers of the late bottled vintage category, producing the first late bottled vintage wine in 1970. And I am a big fan of Taylor's. I view them as one of the top port producers, and I certainly don't think I'm alone in having that view. If I was shopping for late bottled vintage port, this is one of the wines I'd be looking to buy, because generally I find their wines richer and more concentrated, but actually with greater elegance than some other producers. Now, as a company, Taylor's history goes back some 3¼ centuries to 1692, and this is a company that has been passed down through a family for the entire of that time. The company was set up by an English merchant, Job Beardsley, who went to Oporto with the idea of trading generally without not necessarily wanting to make wine. The name of the company didn't actually become Taylor's until 1838, when a partnership was created between Joseph Taylor, John Fladgate and Morgan Yeatman, giving the company at that stage a full title of Taylor, Fladgate and Yeatman. Today, Taylor's have some fantastic vineyard resources. Their 3 leading Quintas, all graded grade A: Quinta de Vargellas, Quinta de Terrafeta, and the more recently acquired Quinta de Junco, are both fabulously located and have some fantastic resources of old vines. As a company, however, Taylor's have always tried to take a leading role in the port industry, and currently they see themselves as one of the leading proponents of sustainable viticulture in the Douro. Certainly the company has been very successful, and today their wines are exported to over 100 countries worldwide. So when, in 1970, Taylor's launched the first late bottled vintage wine, they were trying to produce a style of wine from a single high quality vintage that was accessible, was ready to drink immediately it went to market, and was affordable for everyday drinking. So the difference between a late bottled vintage port and a vintage port is the amount of time that the wine will spend maturing in wood before it gets put into bottle. In some ways, it's almost a halfway point between the very rich, fruity vintage style and the other end of the spectrum, where you have tawny ports that have an oxidative development and are ready to drink straight away from release, and have a maturity and a complexity that's been derived from oxidative development. Late bottled vintage ports are stored in large oak casks, in the case of Taylor's in their lodges in Villanova de Gaia, at the bottom of the Douro near the sea, where it's that little bit cooler and maturing can go on at a slower pace. So these wines will age in these wooden vats for 4 to 6 years, so not as long as a tawny port, and also from a single vintage, whereas a 10-year-old tawny port will be a combination of a number of different vintages. So this approach almost helps to speed up the maturation of the wine, losing some of its vibrant, primary, youthful red fruit, but acquiring stability through this process of gentle oxidation. One of the points the producer makes is that the wine has good stability. You can continue to drink it because it'll stay in condition for a couple of weeks, they say. In fact, on their UK importer's site, it suggests that it will stay in good condition for a couple of months. I'm not sure it would get the chance in my household, but it does mean in situations, I guess, like an airport lounge, that you can serve it by the glass without needing to have too much concern about the quality of the wine deteriorating. Now, the 2019 vintage started with a warm, dry winter, and that led to the vegetative cycle, initially running about a week ahead of average. The growing season was mostly drier and cooler than usual, but the rains which do normally come in the Douro in April were quite heavy, about 98 millimetres for the month, and actually by mid-July, when the grapes started to colour, the schedule of grape ripening was just about back to normal. And August was relatively cool, with just a little rain to help refresh the vines, coming at the end of the month. So harvest started in the eastern parts of the Douro on the 4th of September. was a little later in Punjab, starting there on the 14th. And the result of the fact that there hadn't been significant hot periods during the growing season in 2019 meant the fruit was picked with good acidity, producing crisp, elegant, perfumed wines with good concentrated colour and fresh acidity. Fruit for this wine came from vineyards both in the Cima Corgo and the Douro Superior region. So let's see what we make of it, shall we? First thing I'll say is certainly what they say about the colour being deep seems correct. This is virtually opaque. It's a black ruby colour. The wine is noted as having 19% alcohol, and that is a little lower than the vintage ports that we tried. Nonetheless, the wine also has 103 grams per litre of sugar, so not surprisingly, with high alcohol and high sweetness, it's clinging to the glass there and forming tears very readily on the side there. So let's see what make of the aroma, shall we? The aromas are quite packed with high ripeness, red and black fruit. There's a real opulence to the aromas, like sort of high ripeness red cherries, high ripeness black cherries. Moving on to notes of raisin and prune, really quite concentrated notes. There is just a slight spirity, high-toned note to the fruit. So let's have a taste. The palate shows immediately as being perfumed and elegant. There's good freshness. There's a lovely concentrated red cherry note, almost through to a sort of a glacier cherry, slightly sort of jammy, confected, but very pure and clean, supported by nice fresh acidity. For a port, the wine seems quite light-bodied, and the tannic structure there is quite rounded and rich. There's almost a smooth combination of glycerol and graphite running across the mid-palate. There isn't any harshness to the structure. And I think maybe the fact that the alcohol is only at 19% is also stopping it being too hot at the finish. There's still a good ripeness. There's a slight graphite note at the end there. The wine's reasonable length is supported by its fresh acidity that's keeping the black fruit lifted and juicy right to the end of the palate. The quite spirity notes that were apparent on the nose are less so on the palate and were really only noticeable at first. Now the fruit's opened, that's come to the fore, and I'm not seeing any more of that. By comparison to the Taylor's 2007 vintage or the Vargellas 2005, this wine is much lighter, much fresher. It certainly doesn't have the density. What this has instead is delicacy and elegance. Now, the drinking window I've seen suggested for this is 2025 through to 2030. I'm surprised that anybody would put such a short drinking window on a port, even a late bottled vintage port, given its alcohol and its sugar and the nice concentration of fruit, good acidity. It should have the ability to last far longer than that. It may not improve substantially, but it's certainly not going to fall apart. So coming back to the ports that I first tried in Auckland, this I think was much more in line with what I was expecting to find available, but nonetheless I'm enchanted by and I'm really enjoying its delicacy and its elegance. I took a look at the Wine Search aggregated critic score for this wine, and the score there has come out at a 91 out of 100. I think that's a very creditable score for a late bottled vintage port, and it's certainly a wine I've enjoyed tasting. So thank you so much for joining me. I will leave a link in the notes below to the Wine Searcher webpage for this vintage of this wine, so you can take a look and see if it's available in your market and at what price. If you've enjoyed watching the tasting, I'd be very grateful if you'd press the like button. That would be fantastic. If you have any friends you think might like to watch the video, do please feel free to pass it on to them. I'd really appreciate your endorsement in that way. And if you're enjoying watching these videos and you haven't subscribed yet, it would be really great if you'd give some consideration to doing that, because that would really help me to develop this channel further. If you have any questions or any comments, do please pop those in the comments box below. I'd really love to hear from you what you think about the wines I'm looking at, the tastings I'm doing, or anything else that relates to that. So thank you so much for taking the time to join me. I do hope that maybe you'll manage to find some time in the near future. Come and join me to watch some more video tastings. Till then, bye for now.